So I took a bunch of different shots here. And the first ones I did, I just sort of dumped them all into one folder. But let's see, let's go this way. So you can see this first set of images that I shot are kind of flat. I've got a highlight here, but they're kind of dark overall. So I went back and I redid it, and I changed a couple of things. One of the things we'll do in this composition is you might want a transparent background behind your object so that you can place whatever other environmental object you want behind it, all right? You're not going to, if you want to shoot it on dark paper and have that be your background, that's fine, but you don't have to do that, all right? When you take these shots, you can isolate them, and what I've done with the example I had was I created a mask for every shot, and then whenever I imported them, After Effects considers that mask, all right? Makes the background transparent. So this first one I just did on white paper. It's kind of flat, and I'll probably be able to isolate that pretty decently, but what sometimes helps, depending upon what you have, and you've all seen the technique, if you can find something that's green or a bright blue or like a green screen kind of a thing, that'll help with whenever you have to isolate your objects as well. It gives you something a little more, the software something a little more tangible to find, because I'm going to demo this doing just a quick down and dirty kind of an isolation technique. You'll probably want to do a little cleaner, and there's a lot of setup work. Again, planning before you start is important, because you don't want to have to go back and redo a lot of tedious isolation work, all right? So I went back and I changed my lighting so I got a broader highlight on the pliers, and I put it on, I had a green notebook. It's not truly a green screen, but it served the purpose. The thing you got to watch with colored backgrounds, though, is if you have a metallic object, it will reflect into your object. So you will have to kind of pay attention to that when you isolate them, but it can help with getting a good clean isolation that you don't have to go back in and retouch a lot, all right? So these are the shots I took. I basically just took about 7 or 8 different shots of these pliers open at various stages, all right? I even did some that are a little more of a 3/4 view, but I decided not to do anything with those. So in prepping this, all I did was, and I'll just do the first one, I'll do this one. So I just opened this up in Photoshop. And I'm really not changing a whole lot about the composition, but I did open it up. I should probably adjust the lighting on it a little bit. But I'm just using the 4th icon down in Photoshop. It's an object selection tool, and it actually does a pretty nice job of, if I just click and drag around the object that I want to isolate, you see that everything is selected. So once you do that, you just come down here to your layers menu, and here at the bottom, this icon is the mask. Click on that, and it'll mask out that background. So that's quick, down and dirty. When I start this is all I'm going to do to isolate my objects. I really probably want to go back in. You can see it did a good job. It didn't do a perfect job. There's areas I'm going to want to clean up, all right? But the nice thing about, I can do a quick mask here, get everything in place in my composition, make sure that it's working out the way I want it to. Then I can go back to my original images, clean them up a little bit more, and those links will automatically update, into After Effects. So might be a little raggedy in my first draft, my first mock-up and run-through of it, but when I go back and clean it up, it'll update it and it'll look nicer. Same thing goes with if I decide I need to adjust the image overall, and say I just kind of feel like it's a little bit dark, I can brighten it up. Maybe I make some little adjustments to it. That probably looks a little bit better. Again, those adjustments will be reflected in After Effects, all right? It kind of pays to take the time to get your lighting where you want it to and whatnot, so you don't have to do a lot of individual frame adjustment and correction, all right? Again, planning. So that's how I prepped all of my images, all right? I want to jump back over to After Effects. And so having had the benefit of doing this once already, what I'm going to do here is, so if I want my pliers to open and close, I don't need to do a set of shots with every single frame opening and closing. I can do just the open segment, and then I can take that same set of frames, reverse them to do the close, all right? So, which is what I did. And so let's save this. I'm just going to do this. Let's create. So I imported we looked at how to import images last time, all right? And that's what I've got here. I isolated all of those in Photoshop like I just showed you. And then I imported them, the stills, into After Effects. And what I'm going to do is, our final composition is going to be 1920 by 1080. The images that I have here aren't actually 1920 by 1080, and that's fine. They don't have to be. What matters is our final composition is 1920 by 1080. Our actors might be all sorts of different dimensions. If I've got a ball, I might have, a 1920 by 1920 square composition. That's okay. What I'm going to do is take these compositions and I'm going to combine them into my final, which will be 1920 by 1080. So I'm just going to go ahead and create, I'm going to select my first object here. And if I right click on that, there's a variety of ways I can do this. I can do this like I showed you last time, or I can do it this way. I want to create a new comp. If I right click on that, one of the options is create a new comp from the selection. And I'm going to do that. And what that does is creates a comp titled Image 0564. And here it is. And you can see it's very vertical. Being a little laggy. All right. So I can create a composition that way if I want. And then once I've got that, all of my other images are the same dimension. So I'm going to actually pull this out of my stills folder. And I'm just going to call this, I'm going to give it a new name. Call this my pliers frames. And it created a composition. Where'd it go? If I look at my settings, it created a 15-second long composition. I think 15 seconds is the last composition length I made, so it remembered the last time I did this and did that, all right? So it creates composition and puts that image in to match the full 15 seconds. I don't need a 15-second frame of this image in that position. So if I come down here to my layer, I'm just going to come out here to the end, and it's going to change to those double arrows. I'm going to click on that and slide this across. And then I'm going to zoom in on it. And I've done this once before, and the first time I did it, I did my initial set with each frame being a second, and that was far too long. It was just too slow of an action. So I'm actually going to, being zoomed in here, I'm actually going to take this down to 10 frames, I think is what I did. So basically within 1 second of time, I'm going to get 3 positions of my object, all right? So this is going to be 10 frames long. And then, just like we looked at last time, I'm going to copy and paste this a few times. Go to the next one. Grab my second shot. Bring it down here and replace it. Grab my third one. Bring it down here and replace it. Oops. 1, 2, 3. Lost track. Grab my fourth one. And my fifth one. And that's not really enough yet, so I'll just copy in 8. Replace it. Next one. Replace it. And the last one, we'll replace it. All right. So I've got all of my different poses on the screen, and now I'm just going to space these out. I find it helps if I can click my playhead to the time frame that I want, and I'm just going to slide these across every 10 frames. Speed this up a little bit. All right. So now, when I put my playhead back at the start, tap my space bar, maybe that's a hair slow. I might want to do actually a little quicker, but you know, keep in mind, maybe you want to do different timings for your for your object. So maybe I've got one set where they kind of open and close at a slower pace. Maybe I have a segment in my composition where I want it to be a much faster movement, because maybe I'm going to, if they're using one of the examples we looked at, if I'm, you know, if I'm turning a pair of pliers, treating it like a fish, I might just sort of lazily swim through water, but then I might kick it up and fly through the water at some point. I'm going to want it to move at a different pace. Don't be afraid to create compositions of your movement at various speeds, all right? So just things to think about as you're working your way through it, all right? So I've done that. I've got it opening. Now I want them to close. All I'm going to do is copy all of these and paste them. And rather than slide these I'm going to slide these around one by one. So I'm at 20 frames now, so I'm just going to grab this one and slide it over. doing this quickly. It looks like it's hitting on, but we'll see. All right. So now it opens up and then it closes. So I've created a complete loop. Put that back. Oops. All right. So a couple things to look at. One is I kind of doubled up on this frame when it's open. I don't need two of those frames in there. So I'm just going to select that one and pop it out of there. And if you'll notice, if I'm creating a loop, I want it to seamlessly open and close again. But if I pull my workspace in here, if I play this through, you'll see that when I get to the end, this pose is exactly the same as this pose. So there's like a pause, all right? I don't want that pause either. This shot is the same as this shot, so I'm going to take that one out. Close this back up. And now when I play it and it plays over and over again, I'm not going to have that pause at the end. It just kind of keeps rolling. All right? It's pretty simple so far. Nothing too complicated. So that is one loop. And I kind of want to do this over and over again. I'm going to manually create a loop. There are ways to loop objects or actions within After Effects that you do through scripting, JavaScripting. But I'm going to manually create this loop. If I know I've got, I want to create a decent loop of this object opening and closing over and over again. All right. So what I'm going to do is, so I've said that you can have multiple compositions within a composition. I've got this opening and closing. That's one complete loop. I want to select all of these objects, and if I right-click on them, I can do what's called pre-composing. And what this is going to do is, I'm going to give this a name. Single loop for my pliers. Say OK. And you see it took all of those frames and condensed them down into a single composition. It still plays, just like it did before. But if I open this single loop composition that I just made, double click on that and open it, there's all of my original set of frames. So when I talked before about organizing your workspace, keeping things named, this is why. If you don't name your compositions so you know what you're working with, all of a sudden you end up with a whole bunch of compositions, pre-comp 1, pre-comp 2, pre-comp 3, pre-comp 4, comp 1, comp 2, comp 3, comp 4. And when you've been working on it for a week and a half to 2 weeks, or it's late at night and your brain's fried and you're not thinking straight anyway, having those clearly named will be useful, all right? So I'm going to close that composition. So I've got this single loop. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back into this composition. So when I set this composition up, it was 15 seconds long, all right? What I have for a single loop of this, though, isn't anywhere near 15 seconds long. It does me no good to leave this composition at the length that it is, because it's going to make it more difficult when I place this in another composition, in my main composition, to be able to tell where things begin and where things end, all right? So I'm going to zoom, I'm actually going to pull this work area in, and I'm going to zoom back in on this. And I'm going to slide this work area over to my very last frame. Zoom in on it a little bit more, make sure I've got it matched up. I do. So I can easily trim this comp down to this work area so that I know precisely what it is I'm working with. So I've got my this trim area. Remember, that's this thicker second bar that runs along the bottom. I've got it scaled down to the length of my composition. If I go up to the composition window, I can trim the comp to the work area. Now it trimmed it. My comp's no longer 15 seconds long. It's only, what, 5 seconds? Whatever it is that this is. And when I come back into this comp, where I was working in the first place, you can see that that's now only 5 seconds or so, not quite 5 seconds long, right? Yeah, not quite 5 seconds long. So here's the benefit to that. Now I've got this. I can copy this, paste it a couple of more times, slide these over. It's 14 seconds. I'm actually going to lengthen this pliers frames. Where's that? I'm actually going to lengthen this out a little bit from 15 seconds to 20. This last one, slide it over here. So now, and I think I got to zoom in on where I tie those up because they seem to overlap. So let's do that. So, yep. So I overlapped these. I don't want those to be overlapped. And I'm just going to go through and fine tune all of these a little bit. All right. All right. So I've done all of that. It's about 20 frames long. So I've got a 20 frame loop. You can make that 30, make it 40, make it whatever you need it to be, okay? So, but I am going to take that, I'm going to leave it at 20 is good. Let's slide that over, and I'm going to do the same thing that I had just done. Slide my trim area over. And I'm going to trim this to the work area. And so my pliers frames, I'm actually going to rename that. This will be a pliers loop. Call it pliers loop 2, because I think I have another comp in here already with that name. All right. So now if I, so now I've got this pliers loop 2. So I've got this actor created, all right? Pretty simple, all in all. I basically determined how long each frame would be, timed it all out, and then I created a loop out of it, all right? So now, so why did I go to take the trouble of doing all of that? Because here's what I have now. If I create a new composition that's, let's do 1920 by 1080, and it's 20 seconds long, I can now take my pliers loop 2 and I can add that to my composition far bigger than it needs to be. But I'm going to scale it down. Zoom back in here. I'm going to rotate it. And I've got my first actor that I can now do whatever I want to with within my composition. So my initial was very large. It was much bigger than my final frame area is going to be. But I created my actor at that size, so I had plenty to work with. And now I've got the latitude of being able to rotate him around, move him around in space over time, rescale him over time, and I don't have all of those frames to contend with. My motion of him opening and closing stays intact. So I can start him back here, open up this composition. It's still got all the transforms that we had last time. And I want to set the position, and I'm going to come across to 3 seconds. Maybe we'll move him over here. But as he moves through, maybe that was too fast. Maybe I want to stretch that out a little bit. Let's stretch that out to 7 or so. As he's moving through the space, he's opening and closing. So you see the benefit of sort of planning things out, setting things up, because if you were trying to manage all of those frames and manage your motion at the same time, it'd be absolutely maddening. I'm not even sure you could do it, to be honest, although I've seen some pretty jumbled up compositions before, so it's hard to tell. But so I've got that actor, and he opens and closes. So I've spent, what, probably about 30 minutes doing this little quick mock-up. What I kind of see is that I'm really kind of afraid that the motion of opening and closing is a little bit slow. I didn't do a lot of detail work. I might want to go back into my comp, maybe retime that a little bit so it's a little quicker. But that at least gets me something I can work with. And if, maybe as he starts out over here at the beginning, I'm going to set my scale. Maybe I scale him down. As he gets out here, I can scale him up. And as he gets out here, maybe I scale him back down again. All I'm doing is scaling him, but I can give a sense that he's coming closer to me and going away from me by setting up a simple scale. Maybe I need more than one set of pliers. I'm going to have multiple toolfish swimming around. I can go back, grab that same composition, drag it down here. Let's just scale it down, rotate it. Actually, I'm going to scale that down even more. And I'm going to drag him. Actually, maybe he's going to start life here within my composition. I'm using the same composition, but I'm just reusing that asset, applying a different set of transforms to it. So, got that set. I'm going to set his position there. Drag him out here. Maybe I'll drag that straight over. Nice. Timed a little too similarly. Maybe I want this one to move quicker. Maybe it's best if I actually start this one off screen. Same composition. I could, that smaller one I've got in the background, I could copy and paste that composition exactly as it is. It'll maintain all the transforms I applied to it. I could select those. Yeah. Oops. Maybe this one I'll slide up, and maybe I'll offset it a little bit. Can adjust your timing that way. Now I'm just sliding them from left to right, but I can animate those along a Bezier curve, do whatever I want to with it, and make a whole composition just out of pliers opening and closing and swimming across, flying across my screen. You do have to, so if you'll notice, I'm messed up, I guess. You see how that one set of pliers drops there at the very end? Because when I did this, I didn't have my playhead right on top of the original time point, and you see I've got two keyframes here. If you do that, just find the one you don't want, this one, and just delete it. So I could even take this one and maybe I stretch the timing out on it a little bit. Maybe it just goes too fast. All right. So those are the kinds of techniques that you're going to use to start to build this new exercise out. Did I lose anybody with that or any questions? I will put this up on Canvas too, so you can see it again. But, use those kinds of techniques to build your individual items. Like I said, you might want, as you plan things out and storyboard it, I created one loop of opening and closing. At some point, you may want a loop where maybe he just sort of comes in, his mouth, it's closed. He sort of slows and it opens, and something else swims in and it closes again. You'll use your frames, you'll move them around in order to create that kind of motion as well. All right? Maybe this weekend I'll try and do some of that stuff. I can't do a whole lot anyway, so just by way of example on things. Like I said, if I go back in any of these, I've kind of taken my original photos, I've isolated them, brought them into my composition. Whenever I exported the composition at the beginning of the demos, you'll notice that the composition that I had looked very much like what I have here with this transparency grid behind it. When it rendered with a black background, because by default, that's what After Effects does. It doesn't render transparency. Actually, it will, but for what we're doing, it won't. That's a whole different set of setups. But you can see how that's going to look on black if you want. And within our little set of icons down here, this second one toggles the transparency grid on and off, all right? Probably what I'm going to want to do, though, is I'm not going to want a black background. I'm certainly not going to want a transparent background. So the reason I showed you isolating these objects is so you can put the background of your own in, anything you need to. So let's take a look. I mean, I could do that by either, so I've got my 3 guys here, 3 sets of pliers coming through. Actually, is this the, it is, let's bring this back here, all right. So you can add backgrounds any number of ways. You can create a background in Illustrator or Photoshop. You can find a photo from a secondary source site, maybe that you want to use, import that in. You can also add a solid color as a background if you want. So if I go to the Layer menu, New, Solid, I'm going to get a dialog box here where I can select the color. And maybe I'll do a sort of a slate blue. And it'll plop it right into onto my timeline here. I just need to grab it, drag it to the bottom. So now I've got a background for my objects. I could go out here to yeah, pixels will work. Search watery backgrounds. Find something I like. Let's download. I'll download the large one and then. Make sure that you keep all your stuff together. Grab that. Pull it up in to your project folder. We'll create a new folder for miscellaneous assets where I'll put that. Now I can just grab that image, drag it into my project, and maybe I decide to drag that down in here instead. Different kind of a thing. Create as many of the assets as you need yourself. You should create at least your primary actors, your focal stuff. If you need to grab assets from somewhere else, miscellaneous assets, you can do that, all right? But try to do as many as you can yourself, even background images. But you know, you do have that latitude. I mean, so and as you can see, I mean, pretty much anything you can dream up or imagine to pull in, you can do that. All right. So let's look at one other thing real fast. And that was it. All right. Done good. Let's look at, I want to go back to, I haven't actually gone through all these yet, but let's see what we've got. Of course. I guess I need to fix that. Can I copy the link or not? Probably not. No, I'm not going to be able to do that. All right. Okay. I've got music. So I am going to go pull, whoops, right click, I'm going to import a file, and I want to go to another project folder and steal something. In here. Somewhere here. View, frames, assets. That's not it. All right. Forgot I cleaned that folder all up and organized it, and I don't think I have the original stuff. So let's go to the music, and oh, I do have it. All right, I'm gonna grab this music clip. Drag it down on top. So when you add sound, you can do that. And it kind of changes. I mean, a lot of times you'll set your animation to kind of pace your music or pace your background noise, but you get the idea. You can, when you're looking at music within a timeline, the options are a little bit different. You can look at the waveform and see here's where that music actually starts, all right? So whenever I played this, it was kind of loud, and we can change that by adjust the loudness by adjusting the decibels right here. So they're zeroed out by default. If you go up, positive numbers will get louder, negative numbers will get softer. So if I drop this to -12, for instance, you'll see that the waveform sort of shrunk. Slide this over. It's not quite so loud and so intrusive. You can keyframe those audio levels the same way you do assets. So if you want to start it out loud, you can start it at 0, but as you come across, you can drop it -12 or whatever. Yep, I gotta set my keyframe. I didn't do that. There, -12 there, and now I gotta start this again. 0. Sound didn't catch up with mine. Sometimes the previews, oh, I know why. Let's do this. Let's cut that to 1/3. That might help. It's not behaving, so sometimes you get a lag within the RAM previews that are a little bit annoying. But you can add audio that way, so be selective about what you choose based upon your composition, based upon what it is you're doing. You can do the same thing with sound effects, and you can place those in the timeline as certain things. When you read through the information about cuts and whatnot, a lot of times, directors will time changes in the scene to the audio that lays underneath, to either the music, or they'll sync a sound effect to a cut. And that can be done for a lot of reasons. Some cuts can be really kind of jarring. Adding a sound effect over top will kind of soften those. So, consider sound as you build this out. So, I've got that. I'm just gonna, one last time. So I'm just gonna cut this down. And if you click on the speaker, you can turn your music off. Sometimes it gets annoying while you're working. So I trim that down. I'm going to take this composition, I'm going to trim it to that workspace again. Actually, I'll turn my music back on. All right, if that's selected, I'm going to trim that. The work area. And I'm going to add that to the render queue. Render that. Oh, that was just and there's my exported animation I just did.